In the same month Russia launched its Grand Spring Offensive, it suffered a net territorial loss for the first time since August 2024. The attacker was retreating. By the end of this video, you will understand not just that Russia is losing ground, but why every strategic bet Moscow built this war on is now failing at the same time. And there is one number sitting quietly in Ukraine's April battlefield reports that makes the whole picture click into place. Quick question: how many Russian soldiers does it cost to take 1 square kilometer in Donetsk right now? Sit with your guess. The real number will change how you read everything that follows. Russia's military is advancing in Ukraine. That sentence is true. It is also almost completely meaningless. According to the Institute for the Study of War, Russian forces seized Donetsk after a 14-month campaign, Chasiv Yar after a 41-month campaign, and Velika Novosilka after roughly 2 years of grinding. 3 towns, 41 months. That is the operational ledger of a military that has spent more time fighting over single Ukrainian municipalities than the entire Second World War lasted in the Pacific. 3 towns in 41 months is not a war. It's a siege that forgot to end. What makes this worse is what the ISW adds in the same breath. Russia has capitalized on none of these gains. Taking a town means nothing if you cannot exploit the opening, push through the gap, threaten the next defensive line, force your enemy to redeploy. Russia has done none of that. Its troops take a position, plant a flag, and then stall while Ukrainian artillery recalibrates. The practical consequence for anyone watching this war is simple. The Russian military's speed problem is structural, not temporary. Putin's forces are not pausing to regroup. They are moving at the only pace they can sustain. And that pace, stretched across even optimistic projections, means years more of this before Russia approaches anything it could call a strategic outcome. The one thing you can do with this information right now: ignore any headline that says Russia is accelerating. Check the ISW map, then check it again in 30 days. Picture the scene in some Moscow planning room, sometime in early 2025. A general slides a map across a table. The Donetsk fortress belt, a layered network of trenches, fortified villages, and pre-positioned artillery running across eastern Ukraine, sits there in red. Someone writes September 2026 next to it. That is the deadline Putin has reportedly set, according to an April 17th report in the Kyiv Independent, for Russian forces to control the entire Donbass region. September is 4 months away. The belt has not moved. As of mid-May 2026, the only advances Russia has made against the fortress belt are in Kostiantynivka, and those advances have come from small infiltration units that first probed the southern edge back in October 2025. 7 months of probing, no breakthrough, no stage set for a larger offensive push. The ISW's assessment is unambiguous. Russia's forces are bashing themselves against a defensive architecture that was built specifically to bleed them. Here's what that means for you as a viewer trying to make sense of the headlines. When you see Russia announce a new push toward Pokrovsk or claim momentum in Donetsk, ask one question: has any of this changed the fortress belt? Because until that belt moves, Putin's September timeline is not a military objective. It is a slogan. The research here is still mixed on how long Ukraine can hold every kilometer of that line, but the trajectory is clear. We are calling it now. September will pass, the belt will hold, and Russia will have a new deadline to miss. Russia spends 2 years and tens of thousands of soldiers taking Velika Novosilka. In roughly the same window, Ukraine quietly takes back 400 square kilometers of its own territory. Not in the north, where the cameras are pointed, but in the south, in the Zaporizhia region, while the world was watching Putin's parade. The attacker is losing ground to the defender it was crushing. The numbers here deserve a second look. United 24 Media reports that April 2026 marked the first time since August 2024 that Russia suffered a net territorial loss. Ukraine finished the month with a net gain of 116 square kilometers. The last time anything close to that happened was the Kursk incursion of 2024, when Ukraine pushed across the Russian border and it took Moscow months of desperate counterattacking, and, according to Ukraine, more than 63,000 soldiers just to reverse it. That was a cross-border raid. This is happening inside occupied Ukrainian territory against dug-in Russian defensive lines during what Moscow is calling its offensive season. The consequence is not just symbolic. Every kilometer Ukraine reclaims in the south pulls Russian reserve troops away from the Donetsk front. Every village liberated near the Zaporizhia line is a logistics node Ukraine can use and Russia cannot. The actionable takeaway is this: stop measuring the war by what Russia claims to be advancing toward, and start measuring it by the net territorial exchange at the end of each month. That number, right now, favors Ukraine.
What does it mean, in concrete military terms, when one side loses the initiative? It sounds like an abstraction, a phrase analysts use to avoid saying something is going badly. But it has a very specific operational meaning, and Russia crossed that threshold somewhere in early 2026. When you lose the initiative, your enemy decides where you bleed next. Here is what that looks like in practice on the Ukrainian front. Russia wanted to mass reserves in Donetsk to drive toward Pokrovsk and then pivot those same reserves into a push against the fortress belt. That was the plan. Timed, sequenced, deliberate. Then Ukraine started retaking ground in the south. Suddenly, those reserves faced a choice that no planner had budgeted for. Go north as intended, or go south to stop the bleeding. As Ukraine's deputy head of the presidential office, Pavlo Palisa, noted in early April, Russia is now spending 316 soldiers for every square kilometer it gains in Donetsk. At that price, it cannot afford to fight on two axes simultaneously. But it has no choice, because Ukraine is forcing both axes at once. Military planners call this a dilemma force, an attacking posture designed not to capture territory directly, but to force the enemy into impossible resource choices. Ukraine, the side that was supposed to be crumbling, is now the one running dilemma operations against a nuclear-armed neighbor with 3 times its population. The practical thing to watch? Anytime Russia announces a redeployment or a regrouping, that is the initiative changing hands in real time. Ukraine put it there. Russia did not choose it. Victory Day is the single most important date on Russia's political calendar. It is not a celebration, it is a proof of concept. Every tank that rolls down Red Square, every missile system that rumbles past the Kremlin, every formation of soldiers is meant to transmit one message to the Russian people and to every watching government. This machine still works. The 2026 parade transmitted the opposite message in 45 minutes. No heavy military hardware on display. The risk of Ukrainian drone strikes against equipment Russia desperately needs inside Ukraine was too high. Only 10 world leaders attended, according to New Voice of Ukraine, less than half the number who came in 2025. China's Xi Jinping did not show. He did not even send a delegation as a token gesture. And in the space where Russia's most powerful weapons should have been rolling, North Korean soldiers marched instead. A nuclear power that invaded a neighbor to demonstrate its dominance ended up parading troops borrowed from one of the most isolated regimes on Earth. That is not a detail. That is the entire story compressed into a single image. There is a forward-looking dimension here that matters. By 2027, if current casualty and equipment loss rates hold, Russia is losing artillery systems, armored vehicles, and fuel trucks at a pace the ISW describes as unsustainable for offensive operations. Victory Day parades will face the same dilemma every year. Display what you have left, or protect it. Putin has built a state whose legitimacy rests on military spectacle. He is running out of spectacle. In early 2026, a Russian frontline commander somewhere in southern Ukraine picked up his communications device and got nothing. No signal, no orders, no intelligence feed from the unit 2 kilometers to his left. SpaceX had just activated a whitelist that ensured only Ukraine's legitimate Starlink terminals could connect. And within hours, the illicit Russian terminals that Moscow's forces had been quietly exploiting for years went dark simultaneously across the front. Russia's most effective battlefield tool turned off like a light switch. What followed was not a temporary disruption. Russian commanders fell back on outdated maps showing territorial positions that no longer existed. Units were deployed without real-time coordination. Then, Putin compounded the damage himself. His crackdown on Telegram, implemented almost simultaneously with the Starlink shutdown, stripped thousands of frontline soldiers of the one informal communication tool they still had. 2 communication pillars collapsed in the same window. According to the Atlantic Council, it will likely take Russia several years to rebuild the communications efficiency it had when Starlink was available. Ukraine's southern counterattacks began almost immediately in the aftermath. The mechanism here is worth holding on to because it connects everything else in this video. Russian offensive operations depend on coordination. Small units need to know where adjacent units are. Commanders need real-time intelligence to redirect reserves. Air defenses need targeting data to intercept Ukrainian drones. Strip the communications layer, and every other capability degrades with it. The one thing to track going forward, any Russian announcement about relay drones or new satellite links is an admission of how badly that layer is still broken.
Somewhere in the Russian General Staff, a planning officer is staring at 2 maps pinned side by side. The left map shows the Donetsk front, the fortress belt, the September deadline, the reserves that were months in the gathering. The right map shows the south, the 400 square kilometers Ukraine has reclaimed, the villages still falling, the logistics corridors under pressure. Every soldier in that reserve pool can only go to one map. Russia is fighting one war with half the army it needs. This is not a temporary resourcing problem. It is a structural trap that Ukraine deliberately built. By launching counterattacks in the south during what was supposed to be Russia's offensive season in the north, Ukraine forced Moscow into a catch-22 with no exit. Send troops north toward the fortress belt, and the southern gains expand, eventually threatening Donetsk's own supply lines from a new direction. Send troops south to stabilize the line, and the fortress belt assault stalls further, making the September deadline not just unlikely, but mathematically impossible. Russia's March 2026 casualty figure, approximately 35,000 killed or wounded in a single month, verified by Ukrainian drone operators, shows what happens when an army tries to fight both maps at once without enough soldiers for either. The forward-looking implication is uncomfortable for Moscow. This dilemma does not resolve itself. Ukraine does not need to win the south decisively to keep the trap active. It only needs to keep threatening it. As long as Ukrainian forces maintain pressure below the Donetsk line, Russia cannot concentrate, and an army that cannot concentrate cannot break through. Watch for any significant Russian redeployment from south to north. That is the moment Ukraine's southern strategy has fully succeeded. A functioning military offensive operates on a simple principle. You spend soldiers to take ground, then the ground pays dividends. Supply routes, defensive depth, civilian infrastructure you can tax or conscript. Russia is spending 316 soldiers for every square kilometer it gains in Donetsk, according to Pavlo Palisa, Ukraine's deputy head of the presidential office, in early April 2026. The ground is not paying dividends. The ground is a receipt. Russia is not trading lives for land, only coordinates. On May 9, 2026, Victory Day itself, Russia lost 1,080 soldiers in a single day, bringing its total verified casualties since the invasion began to over 1.34 million. That same day, 82 artillery systems destroyed, 1 tank, 3 armored vehicles, over 370 vehicles and fuel trucks eliminated. The ISW notes this was not an outlier. That was a standard day. And the casualty rate is accelerating. March and April 2026 both recorded approximately 35,000 Russian losses each as summer conditions arrive and Russia attempts to intensify its assaults despite the communications breakdown and split force problem already detailed. Russia is veering toward a manpower crisis, where casualties are outpacing volunteer recruitment. A correction of a persistent misconception is necessary here. Russian losses are not being absorbed by an infinite population. Russia's working-age male demographic was already shrinking before 2022. Every month at this rate compounds a problem that cannot be solved by announcement. The actionable read. Casualty figures are the most honest metric in this war. Territorial maps shift slowly and can be contested.
Body counts, verified by drone footage and cross-referenced by independent monitors, cannot be photoshopped. Track the monthly Russian casualty rate. When it drops significantly, something structural has changed. Until then, the trajectory is what it is.
Ukraine launched approximately 1,000 drones into Russian territory in August 2024. By March 2026, that number had reached roughly 7,000 in a single month. The target set is not random. It is almost exclusively oil refineries, fuel depots, export hubs, command posts, and the logistics chains that connect Russia's rear to its frontline soldiers. Ukraine is not attacking Russia's army, its stomach. The ISW's assessment of the spring offensive situation makes this explicit. Ukraine's intensified mid-range strike campaign, strikes beyond 20 kilometers, doubled in April 2026 compared to March, and has materially degraded Russia's ability to conduct offensive operations across the entire theater. What sits in that near-rear zone being hit? The logistics the ISW mentions, command posts already struggling to function after the Starlink shutdown, and the air defense systems that were supposed to protect troop concentrations from exactly this kind of attack. Russia's soldiers at the Donetsk fortress belt are stalling not only because the Ukrainian defensive line is strong, they are stalling because the fuel, ammunition, and orders they need are being intercepted and destroyed 20 kilometers behind them before they arrive. The trend line here points in one direction: 7 times more drones in 19 months. Repeated strikes against oil infrastructure are limiting Putin's ability to sell Russia's most valuable export and to move petroleum products to the front simultaneously. 2 revenue streams and 1 operational necessity degrading in parallel. Ukraine does not need to destroy the Russian army directly. It is dismantling the system the army depends on, 1 strike package at a time. Watch the drone numbers each month. That figure is Ukraine's most precise strategic instrument right now. What does a Russian strategic collapse actually look like? Not the dramatic version. No sudden surrender, no palace coup broadcast live. The realistic version is quieter and already partially underway. It looks like what we are seeing now, a military that keeps moving forward at a pace too slow to matter, hemorrhaging soldiers at a rate too fast to sustain, while the economic infrastructure funding the whole operation gets systematically dismantled from the air. Collapse will not look like a bang, only arithmetic. Ukraine's President Zelensky has stated publicly that Russia would need up to 1 million soldiers to break through the Donetsk fortress belt. That figure is not rhetorical. It reflects the ratio of attackers to defenders required against a prepared fortified line, a ratio established by military doctrine and validated repeatedly in this war. Russia has already consumed what amounts to multiple armies in equipment and manpower since 2022. Another million on top, at current casualty rates of over 1,000 per day and climbing, would take years and would hollow out a Russian demographic cohort that was already shrinking before the war began. The research on whether Putin perceives any of this clearly is genuinely mixed. There are analysts who believe he is receiving sanitized battlefield reports, and others who think he understands the arithmetic and has simply decided it does not matter. By the second half of 2026, the window that matters is this: can Ukraine sustain its drone production and southern counterattack tempo long enough for Russia's manpower and logistics degradation to become irreversible? If yes, the collapse scenario does not require a breakthrough. It requires patience. That is the strategic bet Ukraine is now placing, and based on the last 6 months, it is the better supported bet on the table.
Strip this war down to its spine, and one thing becomes clear. Russia has not simply lost battles or missed deadlines. It has lost the strategic logic that justified starting this war. The belief that a larger army with more equipment could outlast a smaller country's will to resist. Every rethink that logic has forced, every redeployment Ukraine has compelled, every drone strike that arrived where Russian fuel was supposed to be, all of it points in the same direction. Ukraine is setting the tempo. Moscow is reacting to it. For a deeper look at exactly how Ukraine's active defense doctrine is making this possible on the Donetsk front, watch our next video.
The mechanism it uses to bleed Russian assaults before they even reach the first trench line is worth understanding in detail.